My opponent was really fluid and mobile with his cuts, but he didn't thrust very much based on what I'd seen in his previous fights. I also noticed he liked to rush, usually throwing about 3 strikes or so at a time, so my game plan was pretty simple. Hit him at the start and in between his cuts, and as he was tempo locked, or right when the movement finished. Then retreat, so he'd follow and rush with a barrage of attacks, further tempo locking and exposing himself. My plan was to keep perfect measure and not parry, but just move a bit out of the way, so I still had the tempo of my hands left to strike in between his cuts. If I parried, I risked him slicing off and displacing me and getting inside my guard. There were several times where a downward strike or a zwerk might have looked like a good option, but I didn't throw these attacks as he was bringing his sword upwards and would have been able to cut me and block my attack, so I didn't throw the attack and I just got back to my guard to continue my plan. A lot of times it's more important to not just know when to attack, but when not to attack, and risk double or getting hit. In this fight, patience is what the key was, and not getting sucked into what he was good at. Right here I was throwing some attacks and backing up to get him to rush. He had left the line open, so I just threw a quick hand snipe, then retreated, knowing that he'd rush because he was getting close to the edge. I wanted him to rush because it's easier to hit someone who's coming forward, instead of moving away from you. A lot of times I'll pressure a fighter and I'll put them in the corner and then keep them there, but in this fight, pulling him into tempo was a much safer and smarter option. If I would have kept him in the corner and attacked, I'd have risked doubling and getting chopped up, as I felt he wanted to exchange, especially since it was first to 5 and he was already behind. Now if it wasn't a first to 5, then I would have just kept him in the corner, kept control, and then hit him. Here's another example of where I didn't attack downwards because his sword would have cut me on the way up and blocked my shot. So I had already personally counted 5 up to this point, so I knew I was really close, I just needed the judges to see it. So this time I threw a one-handed cut downwards to where his sword has left. I just wanted something safe and not risky and something from a little bit further away to lock out that win. My game plan when I had to fight him again in the finals was to slap his new game plan out of his head real quick with the fast zip. I figured he'd be smart and try a different game plan than our previous fight. So this time, my game plan was to zip him in the face real quick by stealing measure and attack with a long one-handed thrust. This is one of my favorite moves to do in longsword. I'll put my left foot forward and I'll have my sword tip back, and then I'll bring my sword forward, and as my tip goes forward, I'll one-handed thrust with my left hand and lunge with my left foot forward. This steals a lot of measure because now essentially the sword is in a left-handed fighter stance, and my left foot is forward, so I can steal a ton of range and a lot of people don't see it coming. I figured if I'd zip him real fast, then he'd get mad and forget his game plan and go right back to rushing and wanting to hit me. I mostly had the same plan I had before, to strike during, after, and between his attacks, but this time I planned on mixing up the measure a little bit. I knew he was getting used to my original distance, so now I started thrusting more and doing one-handed shots and stealing range. Here's a good exchange to show you attacking someone before, during, and after their attack, or right when they pause. So here I go for the attack right before he starts to attack, and I land my shot. Notice I aim at the target that's going to be further away from where his sword can stop because he just left that area. And then I hit him right when he pauses and stops. So one of the biggest things here that kept getting him hit was he kept cutting at a still target, which I heavily teach not to do. There's just too many things the opponent can do to you if they're still and you start the action with the cut. They can hit you before or during or all of these things. It's usually best to set your cuts up with the thrust or some sort of deceit, in my opinion, and not throw what I call an empty cut. So in this exchange, I did do the downward cut, but the reason I did it was because I didn't just slice him off the side, I also pushed and displaced his weapon to the side. Then I cut the elbow on the opposite side of where his sword was upcoming, since his sword wasn't in line, to get a straight cut upwards. Then as I retreated, I started to throw the downward cut, but I had realized that he had his sword back online and was going to get the upward cut and block on that one, so I didn't throw it a second time. So here, once again, I knew I was up on points. I had already counted enough, but I just needed the judges to see it. So I wanted to win in fashion and ended up getting the sword grab and holding the tip towards the face, and the judges called hold. When the judges called hold, I thought that was because I had won, but it wasn't. So we just kept running it again. So this time I knew that he was going to try to rush forward, so I just wanted to one-hand stop thrust him as he came forward because he needed to close and wanted to trade out with me. That way he could get back up on points, and I just was not allowing that to happen. To review what won me this fight, it was not attacking unless the time was right, being patient and luring my opponent forward and not letting him do what he was good at.